Addiction never affects just the addict. It affects all of us. Recovering from addiction and alcoholism is also a life-changing battle for families dealing with a loved one's addiction. Numerous programs support addicts as they reclaim their lives, while their families face their own challenges without the same guidance. You're listening to Voices InCourage with KL Wells, where we transform the lives of the families and loved ones of addicts and alcoholics from surviving to thriving in the midst of chaos. Tune in as we highlight vulnerable stories of families who have addicted relatives and friends and learn how they have dealt with the challenges of isolation, desperation, and shame. If you are seeking ways to live your best life, then we welcome you into this safe space. Be a part of change today with your host, KL Wells.
Hi, this is KL Wells with Voices InCourage, and I am thrilled to have join me today Jim Horton, who has come through a very dear friend of both of ours. She connected us a while back, and we had a delightful conversation. And I was on his podcast, Zach's Life, and he has established a foundation. I want him to speak to that, but we've both been in this journey of children dealing with addiction. And that is kind of where our paths have crossed. And yet we have still very different experiences. And he is delightful and engaging and still seeking and learning. And so he speaks my language, and I'm very, very thrilled to bring Jim to our podcast today.
Thank you, KL. So nice to be here. I always, I heard so many positive comments about our exchange that we had from different friends I had that listened to our podcast, and I'm excited. I'm just excited to talk to you every time. And as we mentioned earlier, I'm excited, yet I'm always a little scared, because the last time we talked, you introduced me to a couple of books that I immediately purchased and have started reading. And again, I like being challenged, so you're a good friend to have in that regard.
Fantastic. So if you would share a little bit about your background, your story, and how it has unfolded for you, some kind of milestone moments, and then how the foundation got born and what its purpose is.
I was in the my last job before I became a stay-at-home dad. I was in the mortgage industry. So I was in the mortgage industry in the late 90s, the early 2000s, through a boom and then to the bust. And around 2006, everything started imploding before our Great Recession of 08. And so it had been interesting. I had managed a wholesale mortgage bank and had kind of been in that world. And it was around 2000 that my son was born. And so I left. I live in the Central Valley in Fresno, but I was up working in the Bay Area. So I was managing a bank up in San Mateo, up in the Bay Area. And so I came home. That job ended, and I started another wholesale venture here in Fresno. And my wife and I had a wonderful baby boy. And then 6 years later, when the market started to kind of fall apart or whatever, I was ready for a change. I talked to my wife, who works in the hospital industry, and we both made a decision that I loved the fact of being a stay-at-home dad, and she loved her career and what she was doing, and my career was stalling, and so I made that jump.
Cool.
which was a big, when that's kind of interesting in itself, when you see, especially then, almost 20 years ago, as a male figure, and you see how you're pictured, how the world pictures you is by how much you make, and if you're not making a lot, then it's about how many hours do you put in. But there always has to be some kind of success boundary that you gauge by, and most of the time probably incorrectly, I gauged that by what my peers were doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to
Mm-hmm.
what I was doing. It was like, well, am I doing as well as so-and-so?
Mm-hmm.
And certainly that's how my manager gauged me, according to the rest of the peers in my company, right? So anyway, becoming a stay-at-home dad, that was a whole new concept in itself. However, I hit, at that point, my son was 6, just starting first grade. All of a sudden I became the Cub Scout leader, right?
Yeah.
And now, not one like they had before, because I was used to working 70 to 80 hours a week. So me putting in 40 hours a week, as a Cub master was nothing, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it was the most beautiful time in the world with my son, just getting to experience all the things and scouting with him and planning vacations. And anyway, that was a wonderful time. And I want to say, from the time that Zach was 6 till he was probably 13 or 14, those years, we did scouting, we did martial arts together for 2 or 3 years, of which I had done earlier. So really, I got to do a bunch of stuff that I wanted to do that he wanted to do too.
Mm-hmm.
We camped, we sailed, I coached soccer, I helped coach baseball, and everything that was his life, got to be my life,
right,
as well. And it was wonderful. And then of course, then he became a teenager.
right. Yes.
Which is like watching one of those vampire movies, and you really like the character, and it's like, no, don't get bit. Oh no, yeah, that was good. But and we still had great conversations. But that was certainly that was certainly some challenging years. But again, it felt like a normal process for us. My son, when he was younger, had severe ADD, which we, through the encouragement of the school and then through his doctors, we, put him on a regimen of ended up being Adderall, ended up being the one that worked the best for him, the medication. And it really did allow him to focus in class and go from being an extremely underperforming student to someone who performed and accomplished everything. So I mean, it really worked like a miracle for him. However, it did heighten some other issues, and oftentimes with ADD, there's co-occurring mental health issues, and my son's happened to be depression that developed. It didn't show up in a big way when he was younger, but at adolescence, it really showed up.
Right.
That challenge for him, along then with his ADD, and again, going to a new school, feeling out of place, and then all the normal adolescent things. He began experimenting with drugs probably around 15, 15 or 16, and every time that my wife and I would find out that, when we found out he was smoking weed, he was grounded, for the summer. He and I spent all summer together, which was a great summer,
Sure.
And then something else would happen, but he's growing so dramatically, and then all of a sudden, hey, there's no other problems, and it's like, oh, hey, we dodged that bullet, but then in just a few months, something else would happen, and again, we go through that same process.
Right.
And that became kind of the cycle through high school. He got a job working every weekend, being promoted at his job at a local grocery store, and was excelling there. His grades in school, when he decided one year, he figured out that, well, hey, I need to have good grades for my junior year on if I want to get into a good school. He says, I'm gonna get straight A's. We thought, well, how are you gonna do that? And it was just like, no problem. Whatever he put his mind to, he was very bright.
Yeah. Yeah.
His last year, the summer before his senior year, his drug experimentation became an addiction that we weren't aware of. And he began using opioids very heavily. And from there to the, through his last year, he finally got him into treatment 3 months before graduation. And again, he did the medical detox. My gosh, Mom, Dad, I'm never going to do this again. I'm, so happy we're here. And we're, convinced it was that,
Sure.
that was it. Went into a sober living, but of course that wasn't it, and again, he was, 18 years old and, just young and not understanding. And I think even for us, what's amazing, KL, is that we had probably 2 years of his use history. Now that I look back on it, there were all these things happening, and his mother and I were just in such denial that was happening to our son. And because we had both grown up and went through teen years and college years, and I had partied and smoked a lot of weed and did other things, and a lot of my friends, especially back during the 70s and 80s, that was just normal behavior. It's like, well, it's not that big of a deal.
Right.
Hey, but it was a big enough deal that we grounded him. He had a psychologist, a psychiatrist, we did everything by the book.
Yeah.
But to think that and to understand what addiction meant, we didn't even have a framework. And the irony is that 30 years ago, I worked in an adolescent treatment center.
Really?
So I even had a background in mental health and in this, but I had been a couple decades separated from that, from when I left. And I just couldn't see it as, that's not who I saw in my son.
Sure.
And 9 months into his story, he was doing so well. He had a few slips along the way, but he'd go 45 days to 2 months to 3 months without a relapse, and then a little slip. And again, from using every day for 2 or 3 years, all of that should have been really something that I should have cheered and rejoiced over. Unfortunately, I was, again, because I didn't know, because I didn't understand, because the denial was still so great, even in his recovery, even when he was working the hardest to have success, and he was feeling some of that success. I was part of a tough love group that really espoused, only 100% sobriety is success, and anything short of that, you just need to set stronger boundaries, stronger rules, and more punishment until they change.
Right.
Until they hit bottom.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, for an opioid addict, bottom means death. And my son found his bottom.
Yeah.
And he had a accidental overdose just about a little over 3 years ago, January 7th, 2020. And it was just a tragic end to what was just such a beautiful life. And the stories that I could tell and go into about the kind of person that Zach was, the way he treated other people, the way he thought of other people. I mean, he was just loved and adored.
I can only imagine, knowing you as briefly as I have. You are a walking light on earth, and I'm imagining he had that same heart, as a lot of addicts do. I mean, most of the people that I know that are in recovery, including my son, they have extraordinary hearts, and they feel at such an incredible level and depth. And this world is kind of harsh for them. And so, we all have our different journeys, and And so I'm curious from your perspective, because I've talked to a parent that has been years out. You're just really like 3 years out.
Yeah.
And that was like 2 months before the lockdown started happening
Yes.
with COVID.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, honestly, Jim, how did you navigate this with the loss of Zach, and then going into COVID?
Oh, yeah. Well, looking back now, I mean, I'm reading one of the books that I'm reading now. It's a story of grieving parents
Mm-hmm.
that have lost a child. You know, there's several books like this, but this one really, it's a compilation of different parents that have lost their children to all different sorts of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of them in this book, as they look back on it, they've all learned something. And I can say that I've learned through the process.
Mm-hmm.
All of these parents in this book, this has a very strong religious bent to it. And all these people are people of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to have worked very strongly in their favor. They see this. I don't think any of them would say that the death of their child was a blessing, but they almost feel blessed through this process because of it. I don't have that. I don't have that luxury. And I remember talking to several pastors after it happened. I remember saying that nothing would make me happier than to be able to believe, right? That this is part of a bigger plan and that I'm going to see Zach again. And I mean, I've fantasized about that. That's just, that's time for another podcast. I can go through that experience, but that's just not where I am now. Yet, even saying that, I can still say that I've learned a lot, but they were none of the things that I would have assumed that I would have gained through it.
Right.
The grieving process for a parent losing a child is the most horrendous, extraordinary thing, and I've always been, if not the most, in the top 5% of the happiest people in every room that I've ever been a part of. That's the way I've embraced life or whatever. There was for a year and a half to 2 years almost. I never dreamed that I would ever experience a spot of joy or happiness again.
Yeah.
And it's still hard for me to fathom that could be possible on a large end, but I'm not as miserable as I was. I remember telling a class that I spoke at like a year and a half or 2 years into it, people will say to me some days, Jim, hey, how are you doing? And I'm like, well, I'm doing okay. And they say, oh, just okay. You should be, it's like, and I remember saying one day, this is a day I didn't feel like I wanted to put a gun in my mouth. This is a good day.
Right.
And as harsh as that sounds, I mean, and it was, I think I know enough about mental health that if I got to that point and I went down that road and I thought about that over and over and over, I would seek out some help. But that's the first couple of years, it was a coin flip. Right. Really, as to how I felt. Even today, Kale, I still feel the thought of, now here's one of the blessings: political crises, gas prices, the imminent flooding that's going to happen this weekend because of this next rainstorm that's coming. Nothing matters. Right. I used to fear death happening. I don't welcome it, but I don't. Not only am I not afraid of it happening, again, there would be a lot of calm that would come because of that. And I know that I wouldn't have to live. But I do think my wife really encouraged me to go talk to our psychiatrist and get on some medication. I took some antidepressants for a year, and that really allowed me to function. Yeah, I got to say that first that first year, I couldn't drive down any road in Fresno without having to pull over and just sobbing hysterically. And that happened I don't know how people are able to that lose a child go. Our social constructs in companies is you get 3 days of bereavement.
Yeah. It's insane.
Oh my gosh. Someone that I tell you, I mean, I still feel so broken, but I mean, I was worthless to anybody for anything for a full year or two. I couldn't remember. I mean, that's just it's bizarre. I would get up from my couch. I'm thirsty. I'm gonna go get a glass of water. And I would walk the 20 steps into my kitchen and stand around and go, what the hell am I doing here?
Yeah.
And go turn around, sit back down and go, man, I'm thirsty. I'm gonna go get a glass of water. And I would repeat that 2 or 3 times. I mean, that's the way your mind is just, or my mind was shattered.
Yeah.
Was shattered that way.
Yeah.
You know, for sure. We also, my wife and I started going to a grief group of other parents that had lost children. It was a 12-week process. We went through that, being able to talk about that with other parents that were anywhere from recent to 3 years in their journey. And we did that 12 weeks, then we did another 12 weeks.
Yeah.
And then they invited us to be co-facilitators in the group. So we've been doing this every 12 weeks since then, and that'll most likely be part of our continued healing. And that is very, it's very, very therapeutic for us, you know, and then also to help other people along their journey.
Right. Well, there's a couple of things that you've said in the midst of this that ring extraordinarily profoundly for me. And one is just giving yourself and having the courage to feel the shatter. You know, I wrote a book called The 5 Acts of Courage, and the first act is to feel, because we live in a culture that is distracting us all the time and encouraging us not to. And it takes, I think, great courage to lean into the shattering of our hearts.
Yeah, you know, and I guess I never, of course, I don't think of myself as courageous that way, or that, but I can see that, and now, and I can say that in the last 3 years, I've met other people in our situation that either haven't allowed themselves to feel, or their journey is taking them in a different path. You know, and I don't know why I respond the way I respond. My wife and I respond a little differently. You know, to you know, to this process. You know, but it's just you know, it's our life now. I'm beginning, after 3 years, I'm beginning to see that there may be an opportunity for me to develop something outside of, without this pain being the core of everything that I spring from every day. I see that there's a chance that I don't know when that's going to happen, but I can see that that's an opportunity. You know, now, you know, and I used to even go back. I remember thinking, I've said this in my group so many times, you know, before Zach was born, I was 40. Before Zach was born, I had this whole life. I had a career. My wife and I had you know, been married, you know, 7 or 8 years. You know, so we had this whole life before Zach was born. And then Zach was born, and so then for the next 20 years, and those of us that have children know that becomes like, all of a sudden life starts over. Right? I mean, I no longer think about, I can barely recall anything I did in a junior high school or even college, you know. And if I have a friend that tells me, oh, remember when this happened? I go like, well, okay, I thought I forgot about it. Now I remember, but you know, but it doesn't have any bearing on who I, you know, on how I feel today. I am not sad nor happy about anything that happened when I was 5 years old, or 15 or 25 or 30 or 35. so now that I've lost Zach, and I got another 20 years to go, until I'm from 60 to 80, I don't want the next 20 years to only be framed by the sadness of his loss.
Yeah.
But yet I can see how that could happen. Now how do I change it? Somehow my mind shifted, and I got rid of everything that I had done before Zach. Well, while we were married, I mean, I was still going on with my, career and my life and raising Zach and the fun that we were having. So, and I think that's the biggest challenge maybe, is how do I, for parents that are grieving, how do we create new memories, new experiences that begin to shape and structure our future? Again, without having other children. I can imagine if I had grandchildren or children, then I would, I think to myself, I'd pour myself in. I'd still be sad, but I'd have something to pour myself into.
Right. Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
To some extent, it sounds like, by starting the Grieving 12-week programs and then continuing to do that, it's almost as if you just kept taking one step forward and one step forward and one step forward, and the path began to kind of reveal itself to you. And what I would say too for our audience is that one of the high determining factors of how we survive and thrive in the midst of any of this part of the disease, whether we lose a child or we're still have a child that's dealing with the disease, or a spouse or whatever that is to have a community that can hold us in the midst of it. That is one of the major determining factors of our ability to navigate in a healthy way. And so those steps forward begin to reveal a path. And what I hear in your story is that you just continue to take these steps forward. And it sounds like the path is just going to reveal itself to you.
Well, I had never thought of it like that, but that, and what you said about having a community, that can help support, whether it's one that I'm creating or one that I find that's in place. Obviously the group that I'm a part of, that's been a big part of that. What's amazing, the people that I imagine would have been my closest supporters, the people that have just been almost entirely absent. And it's been new people, my wife and I, started the foundation, and the mission of our foundation is to end the stigma of addiction.
Yeah.
And we've done that through building awareness, speaking and telling our story wherever we can, I deeply encourage people to really change the conversation around substance use disorder, and to think of it as a disease, and that it is, to think of it, act like it as other diseases,
right,
that people have, and to support people that are either like myself that are touched by it. So families that are touched by it, it is a family disease.
Yes, it is.
There's no family out there that's ever had someone struggle with addiction in their family that hasn't been touched by it. And I would almost go as far to say is that there's no companies or workplaces that have ever had an employee that haven't been touched by it. Right.
Yeah.
If the statistics are correct, that 1 in 10 people today suffer from substance use disorder. So that's the latest stats that I heard. And then because of that, of 1 in 10 of us that suffer from it, then that touches even 1 in 3 of us are touched, because you have one person in the family and it still touches everybody. So it has this impact, this growing impact. So,
yes, and the statistics are 1 in 3 families.
1 in 3 families.
1 in 3 families. And so in every walk of life across America and around the world, 1 in 3 families is dealing with this substance abuse disorder in some form or fashion. And so,
but yet we still don't, but Kale, we don't talk about it.
Correct. I'm totally with you, Jim. And it's one of the things that you and I completely are aligned on is the silence will kill us. And it allows for us to make stuff up about what this disease is and who we are and all the judgment that goes with it that is completely non-serving and wrong.
Well, and we still talk about it the way we did 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. It's still portrayed that way in much of the media, right? Right? That's seen, and it's just something that we ignore. I was speaking last night at to a group of high school parents, and the principal was there, and one of the learning directors. It was a great meeting, and I talked about this. Is my wife says that I overuse analogies, and and if that's true, it's only because they work so well for me. But I became aware of this statistic, and it was so astounding to me. And again, because of when Zach passed, I know that in 2021 we had 109,000 overdoses, overdose deaths.
Correct.
In America, 109,000. That's over 300 a day of people dying from overdose.
Right.
Now, and one day I was sitting thinking, I contrasted that with in 2018 and 2019, if you remember back, there were two occasions where a Boeing 737 plane crashed. It happened like within 30 or 60 days. On one plane, there were 132 deaths, I believe, and on the other plane, there were 189 deaths. So just over 320 people died in a month from a plane crash. The world response to that was to ground every 737 plane in the world.
Yeah.
In the world until they figured out to cripple an entire industry if needed.
Right.
Until they came up with a solution for what the problem was. And yet we have those two planes crashing every single day in America. That's not even the rest of the world, just in America.
Right. And
we can barely get coverage on the news about coming up with a different program or a different kind of plan or talking about it. We argue and fight about how great punishment should be, or if it's coming over the border, or if it's, and I'm not saying that all of these things aren't important conversations, right? But we need to change our conversation about how we approach it. We need to change our conversation in our families.
Right.
We don't need to talk about it in schools once a year during Red Ribbon Week.
Right.
Right. It doesn't need to be somewhere stuck in the back of an HR manual about what to do, what happens in the workplace. If this takes place, it needs to be a discussion that's front and center, because we have two 737s crashing every day.
And the statistics are going up. Certainly with fentanyl now, you have no idea what you're getting. It is now, overdoses is now the leading cause of death for 24 to 40-year-olds. And so we are in a pandemic relative to overdoses. And the stigma, the judgment, all that goes along with that is born out of ignorance.
And I was one of those that was the most ignorant. And again, and I had worked in the field, right? I mean, and I tell people when I speak, I don't believe that I have all the answers or maybe any answers. What I do know is that everything that we've done in the past
hasn't
worked, right? The war on drugs that we started in 1980 has failed. We haven't won. No. So let's do something different. Let's have discussions about it. Let's talk about the most outlandish things that could be, that could could stop our planes from falling out of the sky. What could that be?
Yeah.
Right. And now we know that, we know that Narcan, because of the fentanyl epidemic that's happening, because it is laced, because it is so cheap and so powerful, it's put into almost every single street drug that's manufactured today is going to have some trace of fentanyl in it. And we know that Narcan can save a life. It can instantly bring somebody back. It can cause absolutely zero harm. There's no danger. If it's given to somebody that's not having an opioid overdose, it's a no harm. Absolutely nothing. So we have something to do that. And yet, even having that, there's this battle even among our state in California of to whether or not we can make it an over-the-counter drug. It's like, imagine if to get a fire extinguisher, you had to get a special dispensation from the fire department, or you could have a fire extinguisher in your home. Well, what, sir? You have a problem starting fires? You have a kid that starts, is that what you have an arsonist living with you? I'm sorry, we can't let you have a fire extinguisher unless you can validate that. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It's
right?
insane. Yes.
So again, that's one of those conversations, and that's conversations that I have with parents, and that I have with schools. Now, fortunately, even and this is that shift, almost like a paradigm shift, maybe in our thinking, is that even people that would have denounced it even a few years ago are beginning to see the value. That's there. So let's take what we can get and let's run with it.
Right. Well, I mean, part of it is because it is becoming a pandemic, or is a pandemic, is it's touching so many people's lives at this point. We can no longer act as if it's an isolated incident. I remember way back, I mean, this is decades ago, when I helped my brother get into his rehab. I didn't know anybody else that was dealing with the same thing I was as a sister. I would talk about it with people, but there was nobody to talk to. And years later, dealing with my son's issues, there's plenty of people to talk to, but a lot of people staying silent because they think they're the only ones.
Yes.
And so that's why the stigma has got to drop, because what we know is that, as I am much more vocal, obviously, at this point, and the more people I talk to, the more stories I hear, and the more experiences that I hear from parents and sisters and brothers and moms and dads. How many grandparents are raising grandkids now because one of their children has overdosed and died, or is in jail? And this whole notion of that because they're addicted to a drug, they're criminal and should go to jail, we need to unpack that one. Now, I understand that, when your brain gets hijacked and you have to have drugs in order to survive, that's what the brain is telling you, that you will do things that you would never do in a sober or clean state. We have witnessed that with my son. And so there were certainly things where the day that I watched him being arrested, he needed to be arrested so that he could, at some point, hopefully get clean behind bars, so to speak, and then have some possibility of getting his brain back. And in the state of Washington, there's drug courts and things like that. And so there was a big process around all of that, but lots of relapses and ups and downs and all the things. But as I reached out to more and more people, I realized we are not having this conversation. And Voices InCourage was born out of the place of, I needed to cobble together all the resources that I knew I needed in order to thrive in the midst of the chaos of this disease. That should not be happening in this decade.
No.
And so yes, this whole notion of stigma and judgment, and I'm better than you are, you're better than I am, or, you're just a, dirty druggie, or all the things that pop up out of this is born out of ignorance and I think an immaturity in how to love.
Yeah, no, I I agree. And here's where I have to take some ownership for in my relationship with Zach. And I don't think of myself as someone who has a big ego, but I can look back now and I can see that part of my ego said, I know I can control this. This couldn't possibly be happening to my son.
Right.
Because somehow I felt like it was now, now this is an indictment on me and how I parented, and it just kept me from seeing, and especially when we started having those conflicts like a father and son might have, when they're 15, 16, 17 years old, and I'm starting to have some of those conflicts, and doggone it, I wanted to be, you're going to listen to me because I'm the dad, instead of, because I think so many times he did want to tell me.
Yeah.
He was telling me things and I wasn't.
Right.
I wasn't hearing it. I wasn't taking it in. And part of that was I think, my hubris and my ego around that. And now I get to work about how do I forgive myself for that. That's way down on the list of the thousands of things I blame myself about, and that any parent does when they lose a child. Right. But that's still something that I get to think about today.
Yeah. Jim, I think the notion that we're in control is the thing that a lot of us carry around with us, whether we're parents or not. So this is how my brain works, is I believe that all things that happen are in service of a higher understanding. And so I think about it in terms of, it's another way of getting our attention for us to question the unanswered beliefs that we have, that we are actually in control of other people. Who made that up?
Yeah.
And just because we're parents, who made it our job to control our children?
Yeah.
And who made it our job to keep them, the other thing too is I want to keep them safe. I don't want them to suffer. And so I know in my journey, it's been revealed and gotten super clear to me. No, my job is to help my son learn how to lean into when life shows up and knocks you on your ass.
And I certainly get that now, Kale, but just like they say, hey, when you have a kid, there's not a manual that goes, well, there are a lot of manuals you can buy, but no one ever, and if you buy them or they're given to you, you don't read them. But, and the difference is, when they're young, you are responsible for all that. You do have to control everything that they do. And somehow, again, with the stigma associated with substance use disorder and with addiction, because we don't talk about it, other parents that have went through this that may now have kids that are 25 or 30, and now Zach's a teenager, I'm not talking to him about our problems, so they're not able to pass on any of that wisdom, right? And so here Zach now is 15 or 16, I'm still treating him like he's 9 or 10. And certainly to his mother, she's still, she's still her little boy. I was my mom's little boy, up until she passed, right? I mean, that's the way that is. So I think that's where the denial and the stigma of addiction and all that still comes into play. And it's exactly what you say. If that had been my mindset, and I used to think, well, I've always thought, how do I prepare my son to be an adult? Okay, I'm going to get him working. So at 15, he's working. He's washing dishes. He's working in a grocery store. I want to make sure that his manners are correct when he's talking. Okay, I'm going to do this. But at no part did I sit back and have the discussion about, Zach, there's going to be this, when you're feeling bad and you feel like you need to take a drug to make yourself feel better, what's really happening? We didn't have those discussions.
Right.
And I certainly had plenty of opportunities. Right. But it wasn't something that I thought about.
Right.
It's certainly something that I talk to every parent I come in contact with now about.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's part of what I appreciate so much about you is you're still leaning into the lessons of all of this, as I am too. It's not like I've arrived. I'm still unfolding too in this understanding and knowing and rethinking what I believe to be true about being a mom and being a human, and how and learning, like, how do I actually hold the space for loving my son fiercely and loving his journey and his path as fiercely. And how do you love someone? I was looking back over pictures recently because of this book launch that we're doing, and half the pictures in the last 5 years are of he and I, and half the time he's high. And I'm still smiling the same smile because I reached a point somewhere in there where I realized I just needed to love him unconditionally through this journey, because I wanted him to know that no matter what, I was gonna be there.
Yeah, I've heard that before, Kel, and I think had Zach not had the horrific accident that he had,
Mm-hmm.
I believe I would have got there, because it's my nature to continually search,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. For new, different, and
Mm-hmm.
better alternatives, and that's what I'm hoping with groups that I speak to, is that
Right.
they're probably there because they're searching or they're open, and that's it. When we allow ourselves to be open, I think that there's the opportunity to have, some new ideas,
Mm-hmm.
come our way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Well,
I love to hear that, about how you came to that, and what grace that is to be able to feel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the opposite of, hey, I know that this is the right way, so God damn it, do it my way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, I certainly remember those moments in the early stages where I was terrified that I would lose him. And yet I knew, I mean, because Sam is 32 now. So, he's in his 20s when he went off the cliff, and he's an adult. And so, it required a really different way to be with him and be a mom with him as the mom of an adult dealing with substance abuse disorder. And so that's why I think, this conversation is really powerful, because we both have these different lenses that we're walking through. And yet at the very foundation of it all is love. That's the foundation we both stand on. And this desire to love ourselves in our own evolution through this process.
I'll have to think about that a little more.
Okay.
And see what that looks like. I mean, I think that there's some, certainly some things that I do, again, just for my own mental health. I stay incredibly active,
Mm-hmm.
physically and exercise, and that helps. And
Mm-hmm.
I really haven't I've thought of that more about survival than I have,
Mm-hmm.
how I love myself or care for myself. But maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's what that is.
Mm-hmm.
I can allow myself to reframe that.
Yeah. Well, clearly the work that you're doing in the world at this point is changing lives. And that's a tremendous gift.
Well, thank you. That's nice to hear.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes. And so we're kind of wrapping up here in terms of the time that we've got together. So if you would speak a little bit about the foundation that you and your wife started, and then a little bit about what's coming up for you, because we were talking about this, before we got on, and I love your enthusiasm about this. And like I said, it's one step forward, and it's unfolding, and you don't know like exactly where it's leading to, but you're on the path of walking it. And then of course, let people know how they can get a hold of you and reach out to you and find out what you're up to. And because I'm imagining that we have an audience of people that know people, if not are people that have lost children and spouses and others that they love deeply too. So
Sure. Well, we have a online presence at ZacharyHortonFoundation.org. So everything that we do is found there, and then we have a Facebook and a Twitter that I have nothing to do with, that other people are. But our foundation, again, started out. We do some work with sober livings. We deliver care packages to 17 different sober livings in Fresno every month, just to remind these young people that they're still loved and that they're still cared about, right? And so we've set up we call it Zach's Closet at one of the recovery centers, where we're going to stock that with when people go into sober livings. Oftentimes they have no clothes, or they have no toiletries or necessities that they have, and so this will be a place that they can go. So that's something that we're wanting to support in that way. Obviously, the opportunities are starting to develop as we are able to talk to more parent organizations and schools. And then just and again, I love the way you put that things are unfolding for us. And through a conversation I was having with a friend last year, we decided to do a harm reduction overdose prevention summit. And it has turned into just this wonderful event that's going to be at Fresno State next week on March 14th, and it's free to the public. And we're we have 500 seats, which is pretty ambitious, to fill up. But we've already got over 250 people that have that have ordered tickets, and we have 8 different speakers that are going to be speaking. And all really just talking about people telling their stories of success through recovery, and what recovery is like for them. And again, because it's a different path for everybody. But taking this message to, what a wonderful opportunity on a college campus where, I'm hoping that the average age is going to be, 20 years old and 22 years old, and allow these young people to hear this story of hope. And again, because they're all in the midst of it, they're going to parties every weekend, they're seeing things happen that this could never happen to me, and all of a sudden, no, but they're seeing it happen, right? Everyone will leave with a box of Narcan, fentanyl testing strips. So again, they can take those back to their dorm rooms or to their to their apartments, and I see this as even building. And then through this, we're setting up next month. I'm going to 4 of the different fraternities and speaking. And so hopefully we'll be able to have Narcan in every fraternity and sorority home, on the campus as well. And again, these are young people that have a chance to change and do a shift of the type of thinking, and they can start to do very adult-like behaviors in preparing and being safe. Right. And so that's and we'll see where this takes us and wraps up. Throughout the year, we again have as many different functions as we can. This is obviously our largest one. And seeing this, we did about 20 different events last year, from just attending local farmers markets and such, to bigger events. I would like to see us be able to spread and take this model to other cities as well, and just expand. There's nothing unique about the Zachary Horton Foundation to the Central Valley, except it's just where I happen to live. So I know our resource page just has recovery places that are here. So if someone listening to this says, "Oh, I'd love to do some of the things that you're doing in our city," I would be open to helping make that happen, and we can certainly create that.
Awesome. Well, and I'm sure you're open to anybody who would want to reach out and just have a conversation with you too.
Oh, please. Yeah. Call, if you go to the website, and my phone number is there, you can call me, you can email me, and we can talk. I'd also be happy to talk to your organization or whatever. We can do a Zoom, or if you're local or close enough, I can come and visit. But yeah, just again, spreading this message about changing our conversation.
Yes.
Around addiction is just what needs to happen. Let's just open it up and start talking about it.
I'm with you. So thank you so much for being with me today. And that sharing that bright, beautiful smile of yours and your journey. And I am looking forward to another conversation as your journey unfolds, and mine does too, and see where they both lead us. So thank you again, Jim.
Well, and thank you, Kale. Every time we get to visit, it's just such a bright spot in my day.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in this episode. We hope this discussion gives you the empowerment you need during these challenging times. Remember, there is always light after darkness. For more inspiring conversations like this one, subscribe to the show at voicesincourage.com/podcast. We encourage you to share with your friends and family going through similar situations, so we can continue to build a strong community of hope and possibility. Start your life-changing journey today. Join our community at voicesincourage.com.